Hello everybody, Maven here, and welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today I'm going to be bringing you guys my tier list for the best hand cannons in PvE. Now, a lot of other YouTubers have done hand cannon tier lists for PvP. If you want to see those, you can just YouTube search it. Many people have done it. But to my knowledge, I don't know if anyone's done one for PvE, so that's where I come in. And you might notice, yes, I have face cam now. Usually in my intros, I just flash this PNG here to introduce myself, but now I can start adding some face cam here and there when I'm feeling it, because I am finally back on my new PC again for the 5th time, and hopefully it works this time and I won't have to send it back again, so I'll be able to start adding some face cam, because on my old PC it was so bad that it could not handle face cam and Destiny at the same time. But yeah, times are changing and I'm really excited about it. And anyways, the rest of the video was recorded on my old PC, so there will be no face cam, and let's resume that. So hope you enjoy. And now I should preface this by saying that the kind of people who do these kinds of tier lists are the YouTubers that have been around for a very long time. They're much larger. They have earned their place of superiority and respect with integrity behind their tier list, if you know what I mean. Since I've only been doing this YouTube channel for 2 months, likely everybody watching doesn't know who I am, so I haven't really earned that place yet, but I'm still going to do this anyways because it's fun. And I will say though that I am a very sweaty Destiny player. I've been playing since Destiny 1. I have thousands of hours logged in this game. I've done hundreds of grandmasters, hundreds of raids. I've done some speed running. I would consider myself to be a very sweaty PvE player. So at this point, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what weapons are good and what are not, so I hope some of you guys enjoy and find it helpful. And now before we get to the tier list, there is a list of 5 important disclaimers that I need to mention to help give context to the tier list. Now, I recommend hearing them out, but if you don't care and you just want to skip ahead to the list, you can go to the timestamp that's on the screen now. Number 1, these are opinions. It feels like everybody always needs to be reminded of that. In the words of Cool Guy, I believe it was Cool Guy, don't quote me on that, but I think it was. In the words of Cool Guy, it's never a good idea to express your opinions on the internet, but I'm gonna do it anyways. It's pretty much guaranteed that you're gonna catch flack from at least a couple salty people in the comments section. So if you have any conflicting opinions, feel free to share them in the comments down below and we can talk about it. Number 2, exotic weapons won't be included on this list because Bungie updated it so that exotic primary weapons deal 40% extra damage to rank and file enemies, so it wouldn't be fair to compare them against legendaries. Number 3, this is a top 10 list, so I pick and chose the top 10 hand cannons I feel are the best PvE hand cannons, and I even will have a list of honorable mentions, but there is a lot of other hand cannons that I left out of the video because I felt they weren't worth mentioning. Now, if your favorite hand cannons didn't make it into this video, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below and maybe you can change my mind about them. Number 4, explosive payload and time payload are always going to be the best in slot perks for hand cannons, especially if you're using them in higher tier content. They give virtually infinite range, they give more knockback for majors, which is very important in grandmasters, and you can collat trash mobs very easily with them. So this tier list will be heavily influenced by hand cannons that can or cannot get explosive perks. Number 5, stability. This tier list is coming from a controller player's perspective. Now, the tier list may alter possibly a tiny bit for a mouse and keyboard player, but overall would be pretty much the same. If not, there might be no changes at all. But stability matters so much on controller, especially for hand cannons over every other weapon type. I'm playing a clip on the screen right now of a hand cannon with 91 stability versus a hand cannon with 37 stability. As you can see, one's perfectly stable and the other one kicks all the way up to the ceiling. So that's how much stability matters for a controller. So that is also going to be possibly another factor that dictates some of the hand cannons that make it onto this list. Now let's kick off this list with some honorable mentions. Number 1 is going to be the Outclass hand cannon. Now for about 90% of the hand cannons in this video, I'm going to show gameplay on screen to them because I have the god rolls, but for some, like the Outclass hand cannon, I do not, so I will not show gameplay, and I don't even know if you could say there is a god roll for this thing because it's just overall bad. The only reasons it's an honorable mention is because it can make war mine cells. It is an Outclass weapon after all, but it suffers a lot because it's a 180 RPM, which is not the best archetype, and it doesn't have any good perks. It feels very slow with the handling and the reload speed, and the range is terrible. It's just overall not a good hand cannon. The war mine cells are all it really has going for it. Next up, Waking Vigil. Role, Surplus Dragonfly. Source, Dreaming City activities. Hey, just wanted to make a quick cut to say that during some of the gameplay today, it's gonna look like a 6-year-old is playing the game. And that's because I recorded this on my old potato PC and the lag and latency is terrible. But I did what I could. I swear I'm not bad, it's just my computer. Anyways, hope you enjoy. And I'm going to be doing my gameplay in this video in the Orrery Lost Sector on Nessus. However, I have used a lot of these hand cannons in many other places and raids and other kinds of content, and you can see that because I'm including my kill trackers in the screenshots so you can see just how much I've actually used each of these hand cannons. Now, I really love the way the Waking Vigil feels if it gets surplus, and in Arc 3.0, the Waking Vigil might come into play, especially with surplus and Dragonfly. That's going to be really good for ad clear. And now I should mention before we get into the rest of this video that you're going to see surplus coming up a lot, and things like Feeding Frenzy and Subsistence, because when people run a good ad clear PvE primary, it's usually in the first lot going to have something like one of those perks. It's because they increase the reload speed, or in Subsistence case, they make it so you don't have to reload, and that is the best thing you can really do for getting a heavy ad clear weapon, is because you don't want any downtime between killing ads. You want to reload as quickly as possible. So all these reload perks are going to be another thing that you see come up a lot in this tier list. But yeah, Waking Vigil, if you get it with surplus and Dragonfly and put on Dragonfly spec, that thing is going to be collating ads as hard as the Fatebringer does. I think it's going to be pretty nutty in Arc 3.0, but for now it's just okay. Next up, Posterity. Roll surplus Rampage. Source, Deepstone Crypt. And the role you're seeing on the screen right now is Reconstruction Demolitionist. That is the only Posterity role I saved because I like to use it for grenade builds. And again, this is something that might come up in Arc 3.0 because it is an Arc weapon. However, I'm not really in love with the Posterity. It doesn't get any explosive perks. You know, Rampage is really the best damage perk it has, and with surplus it might be pretty good because you can reload quickly and keep the Rampage going. You can throw Rampage spec on there, and that's decent, but again, it suffers from being a 180 RPM, so at the base level, the base damage it's doing, it's just going to be a pea shooter against majors. It's going to feel really bad unless you're specifically shooting red bars with it. Next up, Frontier's Cry. Roll, Stats for All, 1 for All, Source, Iron Banner. Now again, another 180 RPM, but the thing is, Stats for All plus 1 for All is a very strong combination because they both work the same way. You have to kill 3 ads within 3 seconds of each other, so you can shoot one ad and then you have 3 seconds to shoot another ad, and then once you shoot that one, you have 3 seconds to shoot another. It keeps on chaining until you've hit 3 total ads, and when you do and proc Stats for All, 1 for All, you are getting plus 10 range, plus 10 stability, plus 30 handling, plus 35 reload speed, and plus 35 damage for 11 seconds. It is a huge difference. It is a night and day difference. The weapon feels completely different once you proc these perks. It almost feels like cheating. It hits really hard. It slays out super hard, but it's situational. You have to get in a position where you can get those perks to proc, and if you can't, it's just a basic 180 RPM, and that's a problem. Now, I would have liked to have this weapon in the top 10, but there is a couple more weapons in the top 10 that can get this role as well, and they are just better. Next up, Finite Impactor, Roll, Stats for All, 1 for All, Source, Iron Banner. Exactly the same thing as the Frontier's Cry, everything that I just said, but it's a 140 RPM, which I feel it can handle these perks a lot better than a 180 RPM can. But the big problem is, like I said earlier, there's a couple more hand cannons that made it into the top 10 that can get this role that are just straight up better than the Finite Impactor, because the Finite Impactor has terrible base stats. Next up, the Cantata, Roll, Rapid Hit Explosive Payload, Source, World Drop. And right along with it, I'm throwing in the Annual Skate, which is kind of the same thing, except it gets surplus time payload. It's also a world drop, but I don't think it's dropping anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong. And now these hand cannons are basically the same thing, except one is arc, one is solar, and one gets rapid hit while the other one gets surplus. I personally love the Annual Skate a lot more because having that surplus, I have that initial stability and I have that initial reload speed. And with the Cantata, you have to work for it. You have to get those crits in order to get the extra stability and the reload speed. And rapid hit doesn't last long at all. It just feels a lot worse to me. It feels like no matter what Cantata rolls I get to drop, it just feels very unstable. But the surplus on the Annual Skate makes it feel so crispy, and it really hurts to not have this in the top 10, but it just barely didn't make the cut. And the final honorable mention, Survivor's Epitaph. Roll, Surplus, Multi-Kill Clip, Source, Crucible, Shaxx Rank Up Packages. Now, if you would have thought that no 180 RPM hand cannon can slay out as hard as the Frontier's Cry does when it procs Stats for All and 1 for All, you'd be wrong. And the Survivor's Epitaph feels like it already has Stats for All just because it has surplus, giving that stability and that reload speed. It feels very, very crispy, reload super fast. And now the thing about multi-kill clip and kill clip is that with kill clip, when you get a kill and reload and get that 33% damage buff, you have to wait 5 seconds for kill clip to run out before you can get another kill and proc it again. But multi-kill clip works differently. You can constantly re-proc it after every kill, no matter the timer. You can keep refreshing it. So when you start an encounter, you get those 3 kills with the Survivor's Epitaph and reload it to get that multi-kill clip times 3. And the buff you get from multi-kill clip times 3 is 50% damage. And because it doesn't have that time gate like kill clip, you can just keep re-procking it forever as long as the encounter lasts. And you constantly have that 50% damage buff, making it feel like it's hitting as hard as a 120 RPM hand cannon with the fire rate of a 180 RPM. It is an absolute monster. And just like the others, I'm very sad I can't have this in the top 10. But you know what? We're gonna break the rules. We're no longer doing a top 10. We're doing a top 13 because some of these feel criminal to have only in honorable mentions. So we gotta move them up to a tier. Survivor's Epitaph definitely warrants a C tier. The Cantata is like the best in slot arc with time payload to use in Grandmasters. If you have to use a hand cannon for a champion mod and you have to use arc, I think the Cantata has got to be the go-to. And then for Solar, that would end up being the Annual Skate, but Annual Skate to me feels better than the Cantata, so that's going up to an A tier. So no longer a top 10 list, we're now doing top 13 because this just feels more correct to me. I cannot disrespect these and have them in honorable mentions. Now on to the actual top 10 list. The first we're going to start off with is the Palindrome Adept. Role, stats for all, one for all, source, no longer farmable. And we are throwing the Palindrome into the D tier. Now note that it is ranking D in terms of this top 10 list, not in terms of all hand cannons in general, just for the top 10. And now I gotta say, I'd be very, very surprised if even one of you guys watching this video has this role. And I gotta go on a rant. Literally mid-video, I'm about to go on a big tangent. Here we go. So Bungie always talks about fear of missing out, right? So Stats for All was a perk that was introduced with Season 16. Season 16 was also the final season that we had to farm the Palindrome before it went away. And now they only gave us 2 weeks in the season total to farm the Palindrome Adept from the Grandmasters. So not only did you have to complete the Grandmasters, but also when you got the Palindrome to drop, there was also 50% chance that the Plug 1 dropped instead. So you had to have good RNG, complete Grandmasters, and then the Palindrome has 6 perks in each slot, so you had to pray that you got the Stats for All and the One for All together. So if you take a look at my screenshot right here, it took me 95 Grandmaster Scarlet Keep Clears to get this roll to drop. It's ridiculous. It is extremely rare, and I really hope that every single one of you guys watching this video has this. If not, I'm sorry because it's no longer farmable. Anyways, let's talk about it. So, like I mentioned earlier with the Frontier's Cry, when you proc Stats for All and One for All together, this thing, it just completely morphs into like a heavy weapon. It seriously does feel like cheating. Like the thing feels like it has 110 stability and 110 reload speed, just reloads instantly, hits like a truck. It feels so incredible. But again, the reason that it's in D tier is because it's situational. You have to be in a spot where you can hit those 3 targets within 3 seconds of each other between each shot. If not, then what is it? It's just a base hand cannon. Nothing special, nothing helping it. It's just a normal hand cannon. Doesn't have an explosive perk on it. So it's literally as vanilla as they come. So it's D because of the situation. Next up, Igneous Hammer. Role, Subsistence Rampage. Source, no longer farmable. Now we're placing the Igneous Hammer at the C tier. So out of all of the roles that we are showcasing off today, Igneous Hammer hits the hardest because it's a 120 RPM hand cannon, the heaviest hitting archetype. And when you proc that Rampage times 3, it just hits like a special weapon, seriously. The only legendary hand cannon that can hit harder than it is the bottom dollar if you can get it to proc multi-kill clip times 3. Now in terms of pure raw ad clear on a legendary hand cannon, Igneous Hammer with this roll has got to be in the top 3 for sure. Because with Subsistence, you basically never have to reload, and this thing hitting like a truck when you proc Rampage times 3, like literally every red bar gets 1 shot, and then orange bars are gonna like 2 shot them. This thing slays out super hard, and when you toss a Rampage stack on it to pair with that Rampage, I think it ups the time from 3 seconds to 4.5 seconds. Don't quote me on that. I think those are the numbers, but it lasts a decent amount of time. This thing is like the bus that can't slow down. Once you get it going, you are literally about to clear out the entire room. But the reason that it's in C tier is because it doesn't get an explosive payload perk. So this weapon is going to serve you really well in content all the way up to raids. But because of no explosive perk, I think that you're not really going to want to use this thing in Grandmasters. Next up, bottom dollar, roll, feeding frenzy, explosive payload, source, gambit, and drifter rank up packages. Now by the kill tracker in the screenshot, it might look like I don't use this thing much, but it's actually my most used legendary hand cannon in the game, because I'll show this screenshot here, the surplus demolitionist roll that I have over 2,000 kills on. This is the one that I've been using because I'm a really big fan of the perk demolitionist, because I love grenade builds, and I feel like grenades are the biggest piece of tech you have in this game, the most useful resource for both low tier content and all the way up to end game grandmaster content. Grenades are just amazing because you got your healing nades, you got your stasis turrets, your dusk fields, your vortex nades with the echo of undermining for the debuff, your solar nades. Nades are just so useful, so demolitionist is an amazing perk. But then I finally got this roll with feeding frenzy and explosive payload to drop, and you might have seen from the screenshot that I have the option of slapping on surplus if I would like to. So why don't I use that? It's my favorite perk, right? Well, let me talk about it real quick. Surplus makes hand cannons feel amazing, but I feel like it's more impactful for 140 RPMs and 180 RPMs. You get that really crispy reload speed, that really good stability, but the thing is, they're not too bad overall without surplus. So when you expend a couple of your abilities and only get a small surplus plus 1 boost, you know, the 140 RPMs and 180 RPMs are still handleable. They're still passable. They still have respectable stability and reload speed. But 120s, they at the base level reload so slow and they kick like a mule. So once you expend a couple of those abilities and you only get surplus buff plus 1, the effects of it being a 120 RPM show a lot more. You start to get that very sluggish feeling and kicking like a mule, and it just feels a lot worse expending your abilities when you have surplus on a 120 RPM as opposed to a 140 or 180. So when I go with something like Feeding Frenzy, yeah, I'm taking a hit on my stability stat, but at least I'm making sure that I always have that really fast reload. And having that really fast reload, I think, is more beneficial in this scenario because, like I talked about earlier in the video, with heavy ad clear weapons, you want to have that really fast reload or not reload at all, because you don't want to have any downtime between killing ads. You just want to keep killing and killing and killing. You don't want to spend a million years reloading. So I'd rather have that Feeding Frenzy in this case. However, on the bottom dollar, Feeding Frenzy plus multi-kill clip is also an option that I have to mess around with a little bit more, because like I talked about, the only thing that hits harder than Igneous Hammer with Rampage ×3 is the bottom dollar with multi-kill clip. So that's something I got to experiment with, but for now, I've been using the Feeding Frenzy and explosive payload. And whenever I have to use a Void hand cannon in a Grandmaster, the bottom dollar is always my go-to because of that explosive perk. And I forgot to say this earlier, but we put bottom dollar in the B tier. B for bottom dollar. And the reason that the annual skate is above bottom dollar here is because I personally prefer the feel of 140s with explosive payload over the 120s with payload, just because they reload faster and they're more stable. Next up, Loud Lullaby, roll, we'll talk about here in a minute. Source, Lectern of Enchantment. Now we're gonna put this thing in the B tier above the bottom dollar, and I'll explain why. But I don't have the god roll for this thing, so we're not gonna show gameplay for it. Instead, I'm gonna go over to d2gunsmith.com. So the reason that this 120 RPM ranks higher than the Igneous Hammer and the bottom dollar is because it is both of those weapons combined. Just like the Igneous Hammer, you can get Subsistence plus Adrenaline Junkie, which is just as good as Rampage, or you can get Subsistence plus Frenzy, which I personally feel is better than Rampage. And on top of that, you can also get surplus plus explosive payload, just like the bottom dollar can. So it's literally both of those weapons combined. So there's really not much else to say about it. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's more versatile. It goes in high B. And I've been trying to get a god roll of this for a long time, but the moon will just not drop it for me. I don't know, I'm cursed. Next, Judgment. Roll, Demolitionist Adrenaline Junkie, Source, Prophecy Dungeon. We're putting this thing right in the B tier above the Cantata, and note that we will revisit the Judgment later on in this video, so it's not done yet, but we're going to talk about this roll first and we'll talk about the other one later. Now, if you caught that from the screenshot, I have extended mag on this, and you might be wondering why, because I've been literally saying the whole video that having super fast reload speed is key for having heavy ad clear. But with the Demolitionist perk on this thing, you actually never have to reload, because when you throw your grenade, Demolitionist is going to automatically reload your Judgment. And also when you throw your nade and kill an ad with it, that's going to proc Adrenaline Junkie times 5, instantly giving you a 33% damage buff. And Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie are probably like, they're like two peas in a pod. They are like some of the perks that work the best together out of any perks in the entire game. They have really good synergy because you're constantly proccing that times 5 Adrenaline Junkie while also getting your grenade energy back by getting kills with Demolitionist, never having to reload. This is just like Igneous Hammer, one of those busts that can't slow down type of weapons where once you start ad clearing, you're not going to stop until everything in the room is dead. It's just an absolute beast for ad clear. It's going to work wonders in low to mid tier content, but for things like Grandmasters and Master Raids, there's a different judgment role that we're going to talk about later in the video. But as far as this role goes, I would say for low to mid tier content, this has got to be the second best hand cannon in the game for ad clear. But it's just that one of the big downsides for this role for me personally is that it heavily lacks range. Because I'm a controller player and I need to invest a lot in stability for the consistency and feel of a weapon, I have to take a big hit on range, unfortunately. If you're a mouse and keyboard player, congrats, because this thing is going to be absolutely amazing for you. Next up, the DFA Adept role, Perpetual Motion Explosive Payload, Source, Grandmaster Nightfalls. Now, I just got my god roll of this to drop from the Grandmaster yesterday. I'm very excited about it, and I am absolutely in love with this hand cannon. I cannot express it enough. This thing looks amazing, it sounds amazing, it feels amazing, it has everything going for it. Once you get that Perpetual Motion times 2 procced, it feels like it has 100 stability, and it feels like you procced Feeding Frenzy times 2. It just feels so crispy and clean and fast and smooth and stable, absolute laser, absolutely just pounds ads. It may not look in the gameplay like it's doing too much compared to the other hand cannons, but it's all about the feel on this one. And the fact that it's kinetic makes it even better, because that opens your options for the acute burn weapon, so you can run something special that can hit really hard in a Grandmaster. So it being kinetic is like kind of like a free slot right there. It's just amazing. Like, if you haven't gotten one of these yet, you got to go into the Grandmaster right now and farm up one of these, or next time it's around, go at it until you get that Perpetual Motion Explosive Payload roll. And the really cool thing about this is that the Perpetual Motion Explosive Payload roll is also the god roll for PvP. So you can take this thing into trials and then take it immediately to a Grandmaster after, and it'll be good still. Like, literally, it's a very versatile hand cannon that you can use in any activity in the entire game. Next up, Crisis Inverted. Role we'll talk about here in a moment. Source, Crucible, and Shaxx rank up packages. This thing is getting slammed up to the top of A tier, highest rank so far. You might not believe it, but let me explain. And again, I don't have the god roll for this one, so we're not going to show gameplay for it, so let's head on over to D2 Gunsmith again. So do you remember earlier in the video when we talked about the palindrome with stats for all and one for all? And do you remember earlier in the video when we talked about the judgment with Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie? Yeah, Crisis Inverted has access to both of those roles as well, so it's literally 2-in-1 again, just like the Loud Lullaby is for the bottom dollar and the Igneous Hammer. But not only is it both of those weapons combined, but it also has the origin trait Omnilon Fluid Dynamics. Now, as a controller player, for me personally, this is the best origin trait in the game by far. It says that at the top half of your magazine, you get plus 20 stability and plus 30 reload speed. Reloads extremely fast and feels stable as a laser. So it is more versatile than those other two weapons combined, and then also has the best origin trait in the game. And remember when I said it's hard to justify using a hand cannon that doesn't have explosive payload or time payload in a Grandmaster? Well, Crisis Inverted is one of those exceptions because it has access to adaptive munitions, making it so when you hit a non-match shield, you're going to do increased damage with each shot, making it so you can ignore match game. So you can viably use the Crisis Inverted in a Grandmaster as well. It's just an extremely versatile hand cannon. So I think it definitely warrants going high A tier. Next up, Fatebringer Time Lost. Role, Explosive Payload Firefly, Source, Master Vault of Glass. So it is no surprise that the Fatebringer is about to rank the highest overall so far. It is going to the very top of A tier. So it's a very similar hand cannon to the DFA, as in it's another kinetic 140 RPM hand cannon with explosive payload. The only difference is that DFA gets perpetual motion, which makes it feel better in my opinion. But the Fatebringer is adept, so it gets access to adept mods, and then it also has Firefly, which is just way stronger than Dragonfly, as you can see by the gameplay. This thing just absolutely nukes crowds of trash mobs. It does a surprising amount of damage, and the radius on it is actually really good. So it is no secret that the Fatebringer is very capable of performing well in high-end content like Grandmasters. I personally feel like I'm gonna start using the DFA more just because I really like the way it feels, but technically having Firefly is more useful than having perpetual motion depending on the type of player you are. The Firefly doesn't do a ton of damage in Grandmasters, but it still technically does more than the DFA. Next up, Ias Luna. Role, Outlaw Headstone, Source, Grasp of Avarice Dungeon. Now we are throwing this thing into the B tier. I really want to place it above the Fatebringer because you would imagine that the Fatebringer collats a lot more than any other hand cannon in the game, but the Ias Luna actually by far outdoes the Fatebringer. But it's going in B for this reason here. The Ias Luna can only really be used on a stasis subclass. It's kind of a build around weapon. So I don't remember the fragment names off the top of my head, but there is a fragment that says that your kinetic weapons, and Ias Luna, it's a stasis weapon, but it still counts. Your kinetic weapons deal increased damage to stasis crystals. So that means your glacier grenade and even the headstone crystals that the Ias Luna makes with headstone. And then there's another fragment that says that the size and damage of the burst of a stasis crystal does more. And that is really good because of the fact that Ias Luna will one-shot your stasis crystals. So that's really good with your glacier grenades and the headstone, and the radius when you break a stasis crystal is pretty stupid. It's like, I don't know the exact amount, but it feels like it's like 10 meters all the way around where you broke the crystal. And they do a lot of damage, probably just as much, if not more, than the Firefly damage of the Fatebringer. Definitely a lot more radius and a lot more heavy collaterals on it. It's just such a powerful weapon for ad clear. In my opinion, this is the #1 low to mid tier content ad clear hand cannon in the entire game. But because of the fact that it's only really cracked on a stasis subclass, and because of the fact that it doesn't get an explosive payload perk, so you can't really effectively use it in a Grandmaster, that is the reason that it gets put into the B tier. Next up, like I said earlier in the video, we are revisiting the Judgment. Role, Demolitionist, Time Payload, Source, Prophecy Dungeon from the first boss, Phalanx Echo. So this role is going to boost the Judgment up to the S tier. Yes, we finally have an S tier weapon. So like I said multiple times already, Demolitionist is one of my favorite perks in the game, and the bottom dollar with Surplus Demolitionist is my most used legendary hand cannon. Just grenade builds are so powerful and provide so much tech for not only low tier content, but for Grandmasters as well. Grenades are OP, and being able to recharge them quicker just by killing a couple adds is really good. But then you also have the versatility of having time payload, so you can use this thing in any tier of content, and it's amazing. So this thing is literally the best of both worlds put together into one hand cannon. It may not be the most insane ad clear weapon in low tier content. I would rather use Demolitionist Adrenaline Junkie in low tier content, but it's still really good, giving you the ability to keep on spamming those nades. If you don't have this role, you need to go and grab it. Go look up a guide on YouTube on how to farm the first encounter of the Prophecy Dungeon. Get yourself one of these. You really need it in your arsenal. And now you might think the list ends there, but we're not done yet. We got one more hand cannon to talk about, and that is going to be the 7th Seraph Officer's Revolver. Role, Ambitious Assassin, Time Payload, Source, unfortunately no longer farmable. A lot of the non-sweaty Destiny players are going to be very shocked about this, but this is the top ranking hand cannon. This is at the top of S tier. And you might be surprised that this is a 180 RPM hand cannon, which I just talked about suffers a lot from feeling like a pea shooter against majors. But I gotta say, this thing benefits a lot from having time payload, obviously, so you can use it in GM content and it's perfectly fine. This roll I have right here has perfect stability, so literally I can just lay on the trigger. I have full auto retrofit on it, and this thing literally does not drop stability. So in a Grandmaster, I can cross map an enemy from 1,000 meters away, no problem. And thanks to that time payload, I'm getting next to no damage fall off, so I can cross map things no problem. And now, in all honesty, Ambitious Assassin is not the best perk to have in the first slot. I'd rather have Threat Detector for those close encounter situations. However, the first perk slot doesn't really matter too much. It's all in the time payload. And what you may be thinking is, why the heck is this 180 RPM explosive hand cannon the top of S tier when there's literally everything else, these 140s and 120s that have explosive payload beneath them? Well, it's because it is a 7th Seraph weapon, meaning that it has the ability to spawn Warmind cells. Warmind cells did get a nerf a few seasons ago, but they are still very good, very underused, very underrated. Literally, you just kill a few ads, once one of those balls drop and you break it, it just blows up the whole rest of the room and chunks majors for like half their health, making it for easy cleanups. That Warmind cell is like a major panic button and an absolute lifesaver in Grandmasters, especially if you pair it with the mod Fireteam Medic to give you some healing whenever you break those Warmind cells. It just saves your life more often than you think. And now, I have been using Warmind cell builds for years. They've always been really amazing, no matter that they got nerfed or not. And I've tend to learn their Warmind cell drop rates. Now, don't quote me on these numbers. This is just what it feels like. So when you kill a red bar ad, it feels like it's a 20% chance of spawning a Warmind cell. When you kill an orange bar, it's kind of like a 50-50. And when you kill a yellow bar, it is pretty much a guaranteed drop of a Warmind cell. And now, I've only ever had one instance where I killed a yellow bar and it didn't drop a Warmind cell, but you know, maybe my teammate stole the kill from behind me and I didn't realize, but it never seems to fail. It's like a guaranteed Warmind cell. And in Grandmasters, there is a ton of orange bar and yellow bars. The champions are yellow bars, and you're likely going to shoot them with a couple shots of heavy and then finish them off with your primary, as you typically do. And you're gonna get so many Warmind cells throughout that GM, and you can just clear out entire rooms of trash mobs with the Warmind cell. It is just that ace in the hole. It does what every other hand cannon in this list cannot, except the Ikelos one, but that thing's trash. And I really wish you can go and farm yourself one of these, but unfortunately it's not available until Zur or Banshee decides to sell one. And now, the Vulpicula is another 180 RPM hand cannon with explosive payload, except it can't make Warmind cells, but in the first slot it does get Shoot to Loot, which is a pretty decent Grandmaster perk, so for that reason we're going to toss it on this list, make it a top 14, and we're going to toss it into C tier. And finally, that is going to do it for today's tier list. It was kind of a longer video, but I hope you guys enjoyed and found it helpful in some sort of way. And if you guys had any conflicting opinions, or if I left out your favorite hand cannon from this video, again, feel free to leave your comment down below and we can have a little talk about it. So thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment down below. Those two actions really help the algorithm and the video's performance. And if you are new, consider subscribing. 93% of my viewers are not subscribed, so if you like PvE and PvP build crafting and weapon reviews and content just like this, then you've come to the right place. Feel free to leave some feedback and suggestions, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out.